had, of course, a very packed week in Abuja, Federal Capital Territory, at the Afri-Exim Bank annual meetings, which of course was the 32nd in the series. Talked to a whole lot of folks across different sectors. One of our conversations was with Misheck Mutize, who is a senior credit advisor at APRM. And the conversation that we had with him was about the preferred creditor status of multinationals on the African continent, that is multinational institutions, particularly development banks. We also spoke with Lovina Mbanefo, who is a manufacturer in Nigeria. So there was a wide range of topics that were discussed with both. Let's start with Mr. Mutize discussing the preferred credit status of multinational banks and also setting up our own African credit rating agency.
All right, it is, of course, the Global Business Report here on Arise News at the Afri-Exim Bank 2025 annual meetings at the Transcorp Event Center in the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria. And we've been having so many different conversations. We're about to have another very pertinent conversation around the credit status, the preferred credit status of multilateral institutions here on the African continent, and also about improving the belief in institutions here on the African continent. And I'm very happy to have Dr. Misheck Mutize, who of course is the head of credit ratings advisory at APRM, which is the Africa Peer Review Mechanism. Welcome to the show, sir. Good to have you.
Thank you for it.
Now, you were on some two high-level panels. Maybe I want to divide those two panels into two so we can take one subject at a time. But one of them, you talked about maintaining the preferred credit status of multilateral institutions like the Afri-Exim Bank. Tell us why. Tell us why that is important.
Well, we have 1,000 reasons why this is important.
Yeah.
But very fundamentally, perhaps thank you for picking on this conversation first. These institutions are established by member states of the African Union. And they are established as multilateral institutions for a particular purpose to serve. And the establishment also is through an agreement amongst participating states. So if you look at the establishment agreement, you can see why these institutions are inherently supposed to have a preferred creditor status. I can refer to many components of that instrument, which is sometimes referred to as a treaty. There's a particular section in all the agreements where it clearly states that these institutions cannot be accorded a status which is less privileged than the status afforded to foreign institutions. So that clearly states that this preferred creditor status should be enjoyed by African entities first before it is accorded to any other foreign entities. And number two, it allows these institutions to do lending or to support financially through what we call a counter-cyclical strategy. So in other words, they are not profit-driven institutions. Like in the case of Ghana and Zambia, which has triggered the preferred creditor status debate much more than it was before, those loans were advanced when these countries were already in default. All commercial creditors had retreated. I'm sure you are well aware that the market had closed out completely to support these countries to finance their positions, their fiscus. So it's not possible to get financing if you don't have institutions like these. And I did notice that the IMF actually supported Afri-Exim banks in this particular case to advance this loan to Ghana. And they did acknowledge that that loan was timely.
Now, what do you make of the arguments that some of these loans that are extended by these institutions on the continent are not concessionary loans? I mean, by definition, a concessionary loan is supposed to be a low interest loan, right? With a long payback period, or you have a moratorium and so on. So what do you make of the argument that's been lobbed by some that say, well, you're not really doing concessionary lending on the African?
Yes. I think it's a misinformed interpretation of even the term called concession.
Yeah.
Because by making concession, it means you are making compromises.
All right.
And compromises in this particular case is not only in interest rate. And I say this from the basis that where are these entities also getting money for onboard lending? Our own African multilaterals are accessing this funding through the bonds from private investors.
Right.
The so-called concessionary suppliers of financing, they are not making these funds available. I'm sure if you follow the debate, you'd have seen the IMF actually refused to make funding available that it was disbursing through the special drawing rights to be dispersed to Africa through our own multilateral. So it speaks to the drive to want to discredit one of the remaining article of value that makes these institutions be able to perform their functions to finance Africa's development. In this case, discrediting the preferred creditor status in African multilaterals. So classifying them as not doing concessionary enough, it's just driving an agenda or a narrative that will discredit these institutions from international investors. But look at it not in terms of size only. Because even those who are saying they are doing concessionary enough, they don't disburse a significant amount of money. If we are talking about a facility which is 300 million, it's a paltry figure. And this amount, remember, doesn't come in actual financing or actual funding into the company, into the country's fiscus. But it's a facility disbursed to create confidence in the market over a space of time. And this is not a funding to support specific infrastructure projects. It's also funding that is just specifically for structural support to the government. So when you then want to remove African multilaterals from the ecosystem, we are paralyzing a whole infrastructure development value chain. So if we are to speak in terms of impact, it's not just about the size of the amount. Although in terms of their size, they've already deployed a significant amount of money. But it's about the impact of where this funding is going in.
I want to we have to round up, but I have to quickly touch on the second panel that you were on, where you talked about the importance of central banks on the continent having confidence in the institutions within the continent. Can you quickly speak on that point?
No, absolutely. We always have this perception that financing or funds are safer outside the continent. But after we have taken these reserve funds into foreign entities, these funds are also finding their way back to the continent through various investment channels. But we are saying that foreign investors become much more confident if they see domestic players who are also having confidence in African institutions. So one of the areas where we need to develop this is through central bank, making use of our own African multilaterals, which have the preferred creditor status, which speaks to the exposure that they are not exposed to a lot of risk. So if we find reserves being channeled through our own African multilaterals, it will really add to the confidence in the market.
Any fear of concentration risk if all the central banks were to put all their money in that one continent? Any concentration risk there?
Well, there's risk everywhere. Yeah. There is no place that is not a risk. I'm sure what happened with the conflict in Russia, Ukraine, right, where you see assets of a government being confiscated in a territory where you imply or have a perception that is riskless. Yeah. So that speaks to the fact that there is no haven that is less risky or no risk at all. Yeah. There is risk everywhere.
I said that was our last question, but you see, this is such a fascinating conversation. As the head of credit ratings advisory, what do you make of the concept of having credit ratings agency, I guess, on the continent itself?
Well, I think the recent development is helped to justify the case of having an African-based rating agency.
Yeah.
Is one of the key drivers of, producing context-intelligent ratings opinions.
Yeah.
Because investors are looking for credible information.
Yeah.
And they want to see what the rating agency will say.
Dr. Mutize, I could have carried this conversation on even longer because there's so much to discuss. We gotta talk to you again, head of the credit ratings agency at the APRM. Thank you so much for talking to Arise. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.